Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, class. We are from the group 10, with the members are me, Beby Onydria Meireta, and my partners is Arani and Ananda. So, in this occasion, we will explain the topic about using your hand sign language. Alright, guys, we come to the first slide. So, what is sign language? As you can see here in the first slide, sign language is a language that uses the conventional system of manual, facial, and other body movement as the mean of communication. Just for your information, guys, sign language is used for facilitating communication among deaf people or severely dysfunctional nonverbal people in the world. So, perhaps we have ever seen the sign language in on our TV screen, especially maybe you notice in the corner of our TV, there we can see person translating speech into sign language. You know, guys, this is giving the benefit for deaf people if we, as normal people, can understand their language or sign language itself. So from this, we will determine that sign language is a true language because the language system allows a signer to comprehend and produce an unrestricted number of grammatical sign sentences. So guys, by studying how sign language differ and does not differ from spoken language, we are able to better understand how much language is influenced by the medium in which it takes place. For example, spoken versus gestural. This is referred to as a language modality. Further, although we know quite a bit about how spoken and written language is processed. And sign language has a lot to tell us about what part of language are specific to the type of signal used. For example, vocal. And what part are modality independent, that is, which part of language exists regardless of how you express them. So, sign language can give insight into the narrow representation of language and may also give us a larger window into how humans came to have this marvelous ability. Alright, next is the common misconception. Okay, in the sign language, as you can see here, there are two misconceptions. In misconception number one, it's talk about American Sign Language is just a fashion of English. Alright guys, maybe you are unsure about what sign language really is. Never mind, you are not alone. You know, even many linguists were unclear about what they think about sign language. We could post this misconception in a number of ways. French Sign Language is just a fashion of spoken French, or British Sign Language, or BSL, is just a fraction of English, and so on. Under this misconception, sign language are incorrectly seen as just another means of expressing a corresponding spoken language, not unlike the way in which written language corresponds to spoken language. And there are, in fact, manual versions of English in which English words are translated or fingers spelled in the exact order you would hear them in English. These are not sign language, but invented sign system and are referred to as codes. For example, one such code is manually coded English. So, sign language are different in that they are not simply version of another spoken language, but are in fact completely independent language. Sign language are also independent from each other, in the same way that you would not expect an English speaker to automatically understand someone speaking. For example, Norwegian. You should not expect an ASL or American Sign Language signer to automatically understand another sign language. Let's say in the same way that spoken language can share some vocabulary or structural feature based on historical association. For example, Romance language have a number of similarities based on their shared language ancestral Latin, as well as ongoing interaction among speakers of this language. Sign language can also have similarities to other sign languages. Based on their shared history, this relationship between spoken and sign language can be seen when comparing ASL with BSL, despite the fact that English is a dominant spoken language in both the United States and Britain. American Sign Language, or ASL, actually has more in common with French Sign Language than with BSL. And we come to the misconception number 2, sign language is not real language. This misconception actually comes in a number of flavors, including sign language is just pantomime, and sign language can express complex ideas like real language. Of course, this just begs the question, what is real language? The answer to this question is more complicated than it sounds, and it's important to other areas of research, including animal communication and language evolution. It is a fascinating topic in its own right, but a full exploration of it is outside the scope of this book. there are some areas of linguistics that we cover in this. It's about phonology, syntax, and semantic. So we move to the next slide. Is about the arbitrariness. So actually, what is arbitrariness? The easiest way to convince yourself that sign language is not simple as Harry's pantomime is to watch someone singing and see if you can understand what they are communicating. If you don't know anyone who signs, then there are many native and fluent singers who have video blogs on the internet that you can watch. It's a thrilling experience and strongly encourage you to do this. As with hearing a spoken language that you don't know, it's not only impossible to understand what they are communicating, but also difficult in many cases to even tell where one sign ends and the next one begins. So, there is a certain amount of iconicity in the sign language. This is the case when a word shares some physical feature of the thing it refers to. An example of this spoken language comes from onomatopoeia. But guys, before we come to the onomatopoeia, we have to know some clue about arbitrariness. First is the language item have no direct connection with the concept they represent. And the second one, in naming things, human doesn't follow certain rule. Or the number three, the name of things are the result of convention among the language users. So to make it clear, I have my own understanding about arbitrariness. For example, we call table is meja in Indonesia, and in English we call it table. So why it's have different word? Because in naming things, human doesn't follow certain rule. So we don't know why it's called meja, why it's called table, why it doesn't call pintu. So it is my understanding about the arbitrary. So I said before, in arbitrariness there is onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is the word that we use to label the sound the animal make. So as you can see in this picture, there is a dog. Actually, what does a dog say? Of course, it say woof, or maybe a rooster. Of course, it say cock-a-doodle, and so on. The word the sound bears are resemblance to the sound itself. A dog doesn't actually say woof, but English speakers have found a word from the sound a little like the sound a dog does make when it barks. In spoken language, it will be a little strange to take one of these words and try to make it mean the sound another animal makes. For some reason, we are reluctant to say that pig meows, even though in principle any set of sound, for example word, should be able to take on any meaning. So guys, and also there are another phenomena. It's called sound symbolism. In sound symbolism, show that there are cases in spoken language when sounds are linked in non-arbitrary way to meaning. However, there are more cases in which there is no particular relationship between the sounds and meaning. Indeed, one of the great innovations of language as a communication system is that we can take any sound and apply it to any meaning. This gives us an enormous flexibility in assigning meaning to form. And also, so many language researchers argue language must consist of arbitrary mappings between form and meaning. Incidentally, this also means that language can be mutually unintelligible. If the same set of sounds can mean anything, then different languages are free to assign them to the different meanings and suddenly can mean mother in a language and in another. So, this leads us to some of why early characterization of sign language were so wrong, and why people often have the misconception that sign language is not actually language. In sign language, there are many signs that do have an iconic aspect to them. These are some features of the thing that they refer to. However, despite this, many signs still do not have a meaning that is transferred just from watching the sign. Alright, next is about structure. So, let's start with the phonology of sign language. It's recall in spoken language that we can break down word into component sound that have language specific rules about their formation, or phonotactics, and we can break down the sound according to a finite set of features that can be combined in different ways. For example, place of articulation, manner of articulation, voicing. In sign language are built up in the same way There's a finite set of features of parameter that can be combined to form sign. So as you can see here, there is an example. Who did you meet versus I met him. Here the WH word that corresponds to who is met, for example him, is moved to the beginning of the question. So speaker of English know immediately that they are dealing with a question because they encountered the word who at the beginning. Although the word other for these two type of English sentence is quite different. The word order of the corresponding sentence in American Sign Language is the same. The sign of the question are in order meet who, and the sign for the statement are in order meet him. So based on the sign themselves, comprehenders will didn't know they were being asked a question until the second sign, who versus him. However, because ASL signer may furrow their eyebrow to indicate the beginning of the question. These two sentence can actually be different right from the beginning for a question. The signer can furrow his/her eyebrow at the assignment. This also allows comprehenders to know they are being asked a question from the beginning of the sentence. Please remember guys, as with spoken language, the rules of how words may be put together and modified differ depending on the language. If these rules are violated, then the sentence is ungrammatical or the word is ill-formed. Also, like spoken language, a full account of sign language syntax is well beyond the scope of this. But according to the books by Emory 2002 or Sattler and Lilo Martin 2006, they said for their purpose, sign language have all of the hallmarks of spoken language: rule-based structure, recursiveness, and so on. With the knowledge, we can now turn to whether the ways in which sign language expression differs from spoken language, because it should be processed differently. Next is about production errors. You know guys, another way in which speech and sound are similar during production is that both are prone to errors. In here, speech errors are mistakes that speakers make when they intend to say one thing but something else come out instead. For example, as you can see in the slide, a speaker might accidentally swap the initial sound between two words so that they intend to say tell a fable but instead say file a table. We know quite a bit about the pattern of speech error in language, and previous work has established that these are not random errors but reflect something important about how speech is planned and produced. We know that speech errors to the involve similar sound and happen more often when the speaker is stressed. So that's all for me, and the next will explained by my partner Arani.
Alright, I will continue this presentation. My name is Arani and I will explain the rest of the explanation about using hands and sign language. And I will explain about categorical perception or the need for speed deficit. As we know that categorical perception is the inability to perceive the difference between two sounds that fall within the same phonemic category. Sometimes we found out that the same phonemic categories in the utterances when we spoke something. This explanation I will divide it into spoken and sign language. In spoken language, we tend to heard about something like the same phonemic category. Like the classic example is like b and p, k and k. This is the classic example of this is how hearers distinguish voices and voiceless stop consonant. And consonant does not have any sounds of their own. By definition, they are produced by stopping airflows through the vocal tract. However, their identity can be determined by what comes immediately before and after the transition of the consonant. Hearer use something. The hearer that use something, it's like VOT. VOT is voice onset time. The example of VOT can be seen in this slide. This is the example how to check VOT. This is like the use of it is to determine voicing. For example, like b and p. As I said before, b and p in the same categorical phonemic category. So how to distinguish this? We use voice onset time or VOT, and VOT can be in your computer. In your computer, you can use it like you can say the word like p, and you can hear that like in the slow. For example, like if the time between when the airflow is stopped to when the vocal cord begins to vibrate is shorter than about 35 milliseconds, then the hearer perceives the sound as voiced. For example, b. How about p? P is if the space of time is longer, then the consonant is perceived as voiceless. B and p can be heard in the voice onset time. So by using this kind of test, we can determine whether it is voicing or voiceless. And how about sign language? And do they show a similar processing effect? As we know that sign language is also a real language. However, sign language that is not require particular about speech that require categorical perception in order to comprehend it. The reason why sign language does not require it is because to think categorical is not necessary in sign language is the relative difference in speed between the two modalities. Recall that the rate of transmission for sign language is slightly slower than for speech. And the sign language, the rate of transmission for sign language is slightly slower for speech rather than speech. So it's not necessarily for the sign language to use to have categorical perception. And the other reason is that sign language may not require or at least produce categorical perception is that this process may be limited to sound perception rather than visual perception. Based on these two reasons, it can be said that categorical perception is not necessary in sign language. The first is because that transmission for sign language is lower than speech, and the second is in sign language limited sound perception, and it has more like visual perception. And how to determine the sign language? Okay, to determine the sign language, determine the categorical perception in sign language, the researcher focused on the categorical perception of hand shape. The categorical of hand shape can be determined by using ABX discrimination task. And for the next explanation is about lexical access in sign language. The factor known to influence how quickly people are able to retrieve words from their mental dictionaries. This is the explanation of lexical access. And as we know that there are 4 factors were specifically mentioned in the lexical access. First is frequency, age acquisition, neighborhood size, and semantic priming. Researchers have also investigated the effect of this factor in sign language and have found similar results to those found in the spoken language. As I said before, there are 4 factors in the sign language, lexical access in sign language. The first is frequency. In the sign language, the frequency it can be seen in the word familiarity. It's based on the rating data from the speaker about how familiar or unfamiliar a particular word is. And the second is age acquisition of the user of sign language. Actually, there is no particular words that has been directly studied about the age of acquisition. But one study on the influence of initial of age acquisition for ASL found in the reaction time for sign recognition increased with age of acquisition. This study is from Beby and Richard in 2005. And the third is neighborhood size. Neighborhood size also has a similar effect in both modalities. Neighborhood size, recall that the more neighbor or a word has, the more quickly it responds to the spoken language. And how about in the sign language? It can be looked in the sign language shape of sign language in the Spanish. It found the same effect: more neighborhood meant faster and more accuracy response. And the last and about semantic priming, and also has been found in the study in ASL or American Sign Language by Karina and Emery in 1993. They found that faster response times for sign language sign pairs that were semantically related. And in 2002, Emory reports that a comparison rates of ambiguous words in English, Navajo, ASL, and BSL. It found that the English has 20% of ambiguous, that the words have multiple meanings. But for the sign language, about 5%, 4%, 6%, and 7% respective. The fact that show that spoken language has relatively low rate of ambiguity suggests that the amount of lexical ambiguity in the language. And the next explanation is about benefit for iconicity in lexical access. The factor known to influence how quickly people are able to retrieve words from their mental dictionary. And returning to the issue of iconicity in sign language, there are some recent work that examine about language processing system in native and fluent signers can take advantage of more transparent link between form and meaning in many signs. From study from Thompson and college, they look at specifically at sign and share feature with the object they refer to. And from the study, they found that these results suggest that iconicity in sign may actually be an advantage for lexical access in sign language. It's like the share feature between an object and its sign may allow faster access to those object features. And the next explanation is about language in space. As we know that there are two topics that will be discussed in the last part of this chapter, which are grammatical space versus spatial representation and coreference. Language in space, it's more like talking about the spatial nature of a sign language. The both of the explanation in the rest of this chapter are having to do the spatial nature of sign language. As you know that the lack of reliance on word order is not particular to ASL or sign language. There are many spoken language that also use some other means to encode things like who did what to whom. However, other speech language does not use space to do it. So in this section, the last part of this chapter will be discussed more depth about the space in the sign language. And this is grammatical space versus spatial representation. This is like the ability is based on not just on memory, but on your ability to orient yourself and other objects in space to construct spatial representation of world around you. And we know that sign language crucially use spatial information to convey linguistic information. And should it be the case that in sign language user, these two abilities are related, the grammatical space and spatial representation are related into each other? The answer is absolutely no. Because the use of space in sign language remains independent from linguistic visual-spatial skills. The research found from Poisser, Klima, and Belgi in 1987, they distinguished that the spatial mapping and spatial syntax in sign language. The first is just the use of space in describing visual scene, and the other is the use of space for purely linguistic function, such as for coreference or verb that require particular spatial configuration. Actually, there are several studies that look at the patient with brain trauma that found that this association between the skills, which the skills that are grammar and spatial representation. The patient may have intact language ability and sign using grammatical speech perfectly, but what they describe using that sign syntax is incorrect. It can be said that the syntax and grammatical space are not related. As we can see in the case of this patient, there can be used their language ability or sign language ability. They can use the grammatical perfectly, but the syntax what they describe using sign syntax is incorrect. It can be said that person may have lost language ability, yet they're still able to demonstrate the knowledge of using spatial relationship. And last but not least is about coreference. Coreference, as we know that in the previous chapter we have discussed about coreference. Coreference in spoken language found that the different form of reference that differing impact on the mental representation of discourse and processing sentence in that discourse. As we know that the coreference is like he, she, it. In ASL also make a distinction between descriptive noun such as the principal and pronoun to refer to the same thing, such as he. ASL as a further distinction that English doesn't have, although other languages like Spanish and Chinese do the distinction between explicitly mentioned pronoun and unmentioned pronoun. As we can say in our book, chapter 170. For example, when someone want to say Bill blame Jill, they will sign blame BLAME by using sign language and starting in the syntactic location of Bill and moving to the syntactic location of Jill. This will be in some ways equivalent to like he blamed her, but without any overt pronouns. And in the sign language, there are not overt pronoun. They explicitly mention. Sign language, they are without any overt pronoun like he or she. They that explicitly mentioned in the sign. And okay guys, I think that's all this explanation about using your hand or sign language. I hope this you can understand this explanation. And if you have any comment, question, or suggestion, feel free to ask to our group in the group class. Thank you so much for watching this video. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.